All right, we are about ready to begin. Push a few buttons and we should be all set. In the talk preceding this talk, we did a review. We reviewed everything that we had said in brief about involution. We discussed how the cosmos and we came into matter. And we discussed the worlds in which this transpired. And they are the famous 7 worlds that correspond to the 7 metals of Paracelsus in his famous treatise on alchemy. They are the world of divine spirit, the world of life spirit, the world of thought, which is majorly subdivided between abstract thought and concrete thought. Then there is the desire world, and finally, the physical world, which is also subdivided into the etheric subdivision and the chemical subdivision, which is the stuff that the bodies we see are made of. We discussed the bodies that we have evolved and which are still evolving. And those bodies are the dense physical body, the etheric vital body, the desire or emotional body, and the concrete mind. We also discussed the threefold spirit, which was reflectively assembled from experiences in the bodies or by creating the bodies. And that is the divine spirit, the life spirit, and the human spirit, which we sometimes know as the self or sometimes as the spiritual ego. We mentioned that we have already passed through the deepest state of concretion into matter, and that we are now passing out of matter and back into spirit. We are passing from concretion in the direction of abstraction. Now, we talked about the end of involution, which is not the same for everyone. Now, for a while, we are going to talk about evolution, which is the passing through matter and back into the spirit. We are seeing, have very dense notes, and it's a very difficult talk tonight, and it's not going to be anywhere near a perfect talk because the subject is just so hard. So we're passing from being more oriented to form to being more oriented to life. Now, we mentioned that some of our human life wave that are now humans have not yet completed involution. They haven't turned a corner about passing out of matter. And the thing that marks the end of involution is the waking of self-consciousness. So what we're saying is that there are some people that are not wakingly self-conscious. When that happens, when a person is self-conscious, since the self is a spiritual being, a person changes from being a creature to being a creator. It's the difference between being taken care of and taking care of other things. It's the difference between relying on divinities and relying on ourselves. This is, at this point in evolution, there is a virtue that is of extreme importance, and it defines our evolutionary pace. When we are in evolution as opposed to involution, our progress depends not on others, but on ourselves. And it is possible to evolve more quickly than most other beings. The attitude that is extremely important at this time is self-reliance. The more we become self-reliant, the quicker our evolution will take place. Of course, we have to modify that a little bit, and we have to bring a little bit of reason to it. Self-reliance does not mean that we have to reinvent the wheel every time we want to go for a ride, nor does it mean that we leave society, abandon society, and go out in the wilderness one-on-one with nature. Those are things you can do, and some people do develop self-reliance in that way. But basically, self-reliance is an attitude. It's an attitude that requires cultivation. It requires application. And it is an attitude that it is easy for most people, including ourselves, to fall asleep on. In our egoism, we like being waited on, as though we deserve special treatment. That is counter to self-reliance. We like having things being done for us by other people, and that can become an attitude, a habit. And when we have other people doing for us, we're not being self-reliant. When we are doing something, it's always nice to have convenience. But convenience is another one of those things that can lull self-reliance to sleep. I'm finding that with age, a lot of things come easier to me than they did when I was young and basically fighting the world. But there is a danger in that. A person can get to like ease, and you can set up a lot of the things that happen in your life to be easy. And if you do that, that certainly shuts off self-reliance. So what I'm basically saying is that this is important, and in order to maintain self-reliance requires vigilance, vigilant self-watching, vigilant self-consciousness. All right, this brings us back, the self-consciousness brings us back to the turning the corner from involution to evolution. In the talk preceding this, we noted, as we have earlier in this talk, that the end of involution is the waking of self-consciousness. Now, that seems pretty clear, that if you're self-conscious, you're evolving. But you have to be careful because there can be, and for many people in the world, there is an element of deception in it. And though it may not apply to anyone listening to this talk, I'm going to go into that. This is a talk with a lot of little epicycles. I'm going to go into that because having it in the psychic atmosphere is important. Okay, now we've said that we became self-conscious right here in the chemical subdivision of the physical world. And we became self-conscious through our dense physical bodies. This is our vehicle for becoming self-conscious. Now there are advantages, but also potential disadvantages to this. As we see the world now through our senses, it is a clear-cut reality. It's seemingly undeniable. It is not an illusion. It is a state of reality. Now, sometimes our experience of ourselves and outer reality is dramatic. I've had several very dramatic awakenings to self-consciousness. At one time in my youth, I was in a dreamy state, and I walked right smack into the light pole of a street light. That was a dramatic waking up to self-consciousness. And the embarrassing thing is that happened to me several times in my youth. In those days, I was not known for learning something in one instance. Now, despite having come to consciousness through our dense physical body, there are some who doubt the physical world itself. They consider it an illusion. And there are these same people are reluctant to participate in the work of the world. They decline to participate in the work of the world as part of a grand evolutionary process. Now, in the past, we spent an entire talk talking about evolutionary stragglers who didn't take lessons or who wouldn't take lessons of evolution and progress, and they have straggled behind others, some of them quite seriously. Now, it so happens that when some people awaken self-consciousness, they have an echo, or they have a, I don't know how to say it, an atmosphere of consciousness beyond simple self-consciousness. And they go back to an awareness of a spiritual kind or of spiritual states before coming into material evolution in this world when we became basically unconscious. And what happens is when they sense that they have a spirituality, that their part of their being is spiritual, they have a longing for it. But that longing is not pro-evolutionary. They want to eschew physical existence. They want to retreat and withdraw into the worlds of spirit. And you can understand how it happens, because if you're aware of the spiritual worlds, they have more of an ultimacy about them. Each one is a step closer to ultimate reality. But in their reluctance, they feel that the physical world is an illusion and it is to be avoided and to be withdrawn from as quickly as possible, but not by passing through the physical world, not by evolving new features that have the seeds of which have been planted in us during the involution, but just merely a kind of cosmic escapism. So they consider the outer world a great or a grand illusion. Now to us, or to many people in the modern world, that would be blasphemy. The idea of a creation with a creative spirit behind it, even if it's a collective universal spirit, that produced an illusion just for the purpose of escaping it, that sounds like a horrendous trick to play on people. That isn't a benevolent creation. Some people would say, but if you get back into the spirit, it is benevolent, but that doesn't make it. It doesn't cut it. If you present this kind of a view to someone who holds this attitude about the world being illusion, they tend to say that's a teleological argument, and it has little to do with reality. If you have that kind of blasé, dreamy consciousness, I suppose you do see it that way. All right. As another aside, or as another little epicycle, they're not the only ones that consider the world illusory. There are some people that, because our experience of the external world is so indirect, like we don't see the world, we see reflections of light off of objects in the external world, and those reflections of light get turned into neural impulses which are spread to the brain and are interpreted and things like that. There's an awful lot of psychology that perception passes through, and a lot of that psychology is capable of being perverted or bent at least. And so they feel that the world is illusory. Perhaps there is a reality to it, but as things stand right now, we can't really know it. Others see the world as an illusion because everything in it is so subjective and relative. I can remember taking a walk with someone, and we saw somebody wearing a red-orange jacket, and I thought the jacket was red, and the other person thought the jacket was orange, and neither would settle on red-orange in between. That's a kind of subjective kind of way of looking at the world. And these same people will say, well, you have this smooth object. You can run your hand over it and it feels smooth. And then you look at it under a microscope, and it turns out that it's pretty rough when it's seen with that perspective. Now, which of these is the objective reality? And people then feel that we live in a subjective illusion. But in any case, when I walked into a pole, a light pole, it was real and it was awakening. And that brings us back to our topic. Because we have awakened self-consciousness in the chemical subdivision of the physical world, and we did so through our dense physical bodies, we have come to think of self-consciousness in terms of discrete events or discrete moments. We do not always see self-consciousness as a continuum. This is complicated by the fact that sometimes we are more self-conscious than others, enough so that the times that we aren't is self-consciousness, we seem to be not even self-conscious at all. Consciousness is not something, self-consciousness is not something that is one time for all time. It is a continuum, and we become more or less self-consciousness. Now, since the self is a spiritual entity and not a concrete entity, it is eternal. It is infinite, it is endless. And we can go into infinite depth into this continuum. We can go deeper and deeper into self-consciousness, and then amazing things happen. We're going to talk about those somewhere along the way, but not right now. So, what we've done is we've gone through an epicycle, through a journey to get to the point that we are only beginning to be awake. We are at the beginning of something that is extremely large, something big, something of great importance. Now, what we want to do is we want to explore some activities and principles in our evolutionary work, which is what we have just begun, and we've talked about it in the simplest way possible. We've talked about it in terms of self-consciousness. What we are going to talk about now, and for several talks, and eventually there will be a special sub-series, if I live that long. What we're going to do now is we're going to talk about soul and soul growth. We're going to talk about soul and soul growth. To do that, we have to be very elementary. We have to be clear about what we mean about soul. I've been down this path before, but this is one of those things, because it's important, we're going to do it again. We're going to try to understand soul, because it's important to everything that we do now. Probably the most common use of the word soul is as a noun. It is a noun that is synonymous with an individuality and an entity. In this usage of soul, a self is a soul, or a spiritual ego is a soul. And for some people, a monad is a soul. Now, this noun is used individually or collectively. We say things, they were a sad group of souls, talking about individuals. Or we say, Mary is an old soul. Those are seeing souls as individual beings. Now, this is a valid use of the word soul in our language. I use it. I think everybody that's listening to this talk has used it at some time or another. But that's not the way we're going to be using it this evening. Another use of the word soul is for more hoity-toity types of people. It comes from academic philosophy, or from the history of academic philosophy. Aristotle and the Aristotelians, even those from just a few centuries ago, use the word soul in a different way. The different way than the way we use it in these talks. In this usage, soul is what stands between body and spirit. To Aristotle, we were composed of body, soul, and spirit. when he's talking about body, or when people use soul in this way, they're talking exclusively about the physical body. Most men on the street, you talk to them and they think that they're talking to the being that is this body and not the being that's using this body. So this is the entirety of the existence when we're talking about body. By spirit, in this definition, it means an individuality. The use of spirit in this sense is very much in agreement with all of the definitions of soul. It is the truth knower. It is that transcendent being that sees all, knows all. So everything between the body and the spirit includes the more, how would you say it, the more plastic parts of our being. And that includes the etheric vital body, the desire or emotional body, and the concrete mind. Collectively, they are what is meant by soul in this meaning. We're not using this definition of soul either, but it's helpful that we clear the air so that some people don't come in with a different view from what we're going to be talking about. Another use of soul is as an adverb or as an adjective. We might say that she is a soulful musician, or she plays soulfully. When we use it that way, we're using it as either an adjective or an adverb. Now, this use of soul can even be used as a noun. We can say she played with soul. Now, in this usage, soul means a kind of knowledge or a character of being that is gained from experience. We say a soulful person is somebody who has learned a lot from experience, and that experience has changed them. But soul in this sense is not a substance. It's not like the worlds of Aristotle, for example. But soul is more like a state of mind or a state of attitude. Now, all of these definitions of soul apply to what we are considering soul to be. So they're not, going into this exercise is not a wasted time, because each of them gives something of a flavor of what soul is. Now, we talk about what soul isn't. Now we have to try to talk about what soul is. And this is difficult, because what we're going to do is going to be incomplete. And this is so because there are things that I do not know. And in some places there will be speculations, and if I speculate, I will let you know that I'm speculating. But please note that to give a thorough description of soul is not something that I'm qualified to do. I guess you might say I am below an amateur in status in what I'm doing, but it's got to be talked about. Nobody in the world is talking about these things, and that's kind of sad. This is so important. It's about our whole evolution, and nobody's taking a shot at it. All right, we're going to try and get at what soul is. And let's begin very, very simply. Soul is a substance between the states of matter and the states of spirit. And it is common to both. Soul is a substance that is somewhere in between being spirit and matter, and it's a substance, and it has qualities common to both spirit and matter. Another way of looking at soul is digested matter that is becoming spirit. Soul is digested matter that is becoming spirit. Another way of looking at it is soul is a philosophical substance or state substance that is potential becoming actualized. Now, as we've been looking at the spiritual and material worlds, another way of looking at this, we've been looking at it saying that the whole process of the creative evolution that we are so fortunate to be a part of is making the unknown known. The unknown is matter, and the known is spirit. And in these, soul is something that stands between, it's a state of stuff and being that stands between the unknown and the known. Now, each of these ways of looking at soul contributes to the understanding of soul. If you want to hold all of them in mind, you can get an idea of it. Now, there may be other ways simple ways of describing soul, and some of them may even be more apt. And if you ponder on the subject, they might come to your consciousness. Now, we're going to try to take the essence out of each of these as we explore soul and soul growth. Now, we're doing this in terms of modern mysticism. These talks are called modern mysticism. And mysticism is the study of the mysteries. That is understanding where things came from, how they became what they are, and what they are becoming, and how that is done. And initiates into the mysteries have made very scientific studies of the things that we're talking about. And so the information in these talks is primarily from modern mysticism. Now, we want to talk about what modern mysticism says about soul. Modern mysticism says there are 3 types of soul. One is called conscious soul. Sometimes it's called consciousness soul. Both words are usable. In some cases, conscious is better descriptive, but in other cases, consciousness soul is better. The second kind of soul is intellectual soul. And the third type is emotional soul. As might be expected, if soul is a state somewhere, or is a substance and a state of consciousness somewhere between matter and spirit, each state of soul is associated with a world in which experience has created or generated the soul. Now, if we say it another way, we can say that each kind of soul is formed in a world or major subdivision of a world. And we're talking about the worlds that we are in. Now we're going to come back to these things again and again. We're just doing a little bit of groundbreaking tonight. This is one of those things I could be in it for the rest of my life, but that wouldn't be a very interesting talk. Conscious soul or consciousness soul is of and from and in the chemical subdivision of the physical world, especially where it is generated, and that is the human dense physical body. So, conscious or consciousness soul is of, from, and in the chemical physical body in the chemical subdivision of the physical world. Intellectual soul is of and from and in the etheric subdivision of the physical world, and most definitely or most specifically into the etheric vital body. And, not surprisingly, emotional soul is of, from, and in the desire body and the desire world. Now, it's important to remember that each of these worlds or subdivisions is a corresponding reflection or projection of an attribute of the transcendental spiritual worlds. That is the threefold spirit. I'll try to clarify it a little bit better than that. Now, the way we have been looking at this is that the spirit, the creator, the knowing knower, is the threefold spirit. It is a spiritual entity. And in the creation, it projects itself into the unknown, or it projects itself into what could be known. Now, in a kind of shorthand, the known reflectively projects itself into the unknown as a creative dream or a tentative hypothesis. We've gone into this in the past, that in the same way that we are knowing and growing and becoming more conscious, the whole creation is the same thing. In the absolute, there's unlimited potential, and in that unlimited potential, much is unknown. So, the spirit projects itself as a dream into the unknown, as a hypothesis of what it could be, sort of like a creative dream of a painter or something of that nature. Now, since the unknown is unknown, it can't be seen through. The spirit can't see through it. So, speaking both figuratively, but in a strange way, actually, this projection gets reflected. It's like seeing yourself in a mirror, except that this mirror is an interface between what is known and what is unknown, and what we think it is doesn't always match up with what the unknown is. And by interacting with the unknown, it becomes known. All right. So the worlds in concretion can be seen as an interface between the known and the unknown. Now, another way of saying is that the concrete realms are the concrete dream or the creative scheme congealed in the unknown. That's what the worlds are. This is why some consider the worlds as illusions, because they're not realized yet, they're a dream, and they think that to be looking at the dream, you're looking at an illusion. They don't have the idea. It hasn't sunk into their spirituality of seeing this as a creative hypothesis. Now, the creation or the creativity that actually changes the known, unknown to the known, is in microcosm. That is, all of the microcosms, humans, animals, plants, minerals, all of them are the agencies that do change the unknown to the known, especially humans, because we are self-conscious. So, the whole process of using our bodies in the worlds which are unknowns and interacting with the unknowns, and the essence of what we get out of the experience through our bodies is soul stuff. So the whole process is called soul growth. Now mind you, this is only just the very beginning of something that's very hard to get. So, soul growth is developing matter into spirit. And the part of matter that has been digested or that has become at least partially known, but not completely known because it's not in spirit yet, which is the knower, is soul material, and that is soul growth. Now, since each of the worlds and the corresponding body to the world is a reflection of an attribute of the threefold spirit, the soul material of each type feeds its corresponding spirit. All right. Not so hard. Since the chemical subdivision of the physical world is the reflective projection of divine spirit, conscious soul or consciousness soul feeds divine spirit. Analogously, the intellectual soul feeds the life spirit. Now we're going to take a little tiny side trip here. Intellectual seems to be a rather strange usage in this sense. And this is an atavism in the history of philosophy. To Plato and all the Platonists that followed afterward, what we call life spirit, they called intellect. Hence, the soul material that is taken out of the etheric vital body that feeds the life spirit is called intellectual soul. You could call it life spirit soul, but that's the tradition. And analogously, the emotional soul feeds the human spirit, and it's in the desire body. Now we come to things that are even more difficult to comprehend. Now, some of these things require a consciousness which we may not possess. We might get there eventually. We will get there. I am only reporting the little that I understand or that I think I understand perfectly or imperfectly. Again, there will be speculation and there may be error. If you detect errors, let me know, because it rues me greatly to give errant information. All right, let's begin in a very simple way and ask, what is conscious or consciousness soul? What is conscious soul. Now, the highest state of being that accessible to us is divine spirit. Now, moments ago, we mentioned that life spirit is intellect. And by life spirit, intellect is undifferentiated truth. Differentiated truth is human spirit. Differentiated truth are principles and ideas and theorems and things like that, but just pure undifferentiated truth is the intellect. It is the life spirit. Now, if we look at, this is almost the same thing as when Christ, speaking from life spirit, says, I am the truth. And he is speaking quite honestly because he is in life spirit and is the representative of life spirit. Now, if this is true about the intellect, the truth that the undifferentiated truth is about is divine spirit. It is the fundamental, basic spiritual reality that truth is about. But it is so fundamental and so basic and so deeply in ultimate reality that it can't be said in any other way. Now, if we take St. John's Gospel and we realize that life spirit is the Word, then the divine spirit is the definition or the meaning of that word. Or like when Christ says, I'm carrying out the work of the Father representing divine spirit. Now, in this we can see that divine spirit is being and consciousness beyond expression, beyond condition. To us, it is a tautological reality. All we can say is something, consciousness is conscious. And if this is the most basic consciousness, this is all you can say about it. We have a great paucity of language when it comes to things that are that deeply transcendental. Now, to some of us in the world, philosophers, academic as well as mystical, the divine spirit has been seen as arbitrary. It has been accused of that because we're beings that need to have things explained to us or demonstrated to us, but just the mere being of something or the mere beingness of something seems arbitrary to us. Yeah, I can understand why people come to that kind of understanding, but it's enough to say it's just consciousness, the purest and simple kind of consciousness. And this is what is fed by conscious soul, or consciousness soul, if you want to call it that. Now, it is in this rudest, farthest from spirit world that conscious soul is produced. So it has been said, and correctly so, that anything that awakens consciousness produces conscious soul. Now, when I walked into the lamp pole, I came to consciousness I became more awake, but in that same act, though I didn't realize it, but it was in my body, especially after 3 replications, it was in my body that there was not only consciousness, but there was more conscious soul, more capability of being conscious. Now, in the solids, the most concrete part of the chemical subdivision of the physical world, that's where we do most of our work. Most interactions of physical stuff on physical stuff produce conscious soul. And for this reason, people who are extremely fundamental about the production of conscious soul say that it is born of impact. Now that's true, but the impact is actually much more sophisticated than that in the way we've developed. Now, as we're going to see in future talk, our evolutionary service to the great creation is working with the potential beings that are now in the mineral kingdom. The evolution of the mineral kingdom is our evolutionary work, and we raise ourselves by raising them. In a real basic way, if we're doing things like mining or things like that, we are working with the mineral kingdom. And especially if we're doing something like digging a ditch, we are actually, in doing that, we're producing conscious soul. But then you might say, what about somebody who has an office job? Well, we don't have to worry about that because we all have plenty of interaction with chemical matter anyway. If we take a walk in the park, or if we build a snowman or do something like that, if we do it thoroughly and deliberately and self-consciously, we're producing conscious soul. Now you see why it was said much earlier how important it is that we are self-reliant. Because if we're self-reliant, we realize that we are the agencies for the entire creation. Each of us has a responsibility to do what we do, even in the chemical world, deliberately. And so that kind of self-responsibility is really important. Now, industry may be good for the minerals, but the more personal activities, like building a snowman, are more important because we have intimate interaction. Now, we have gone well beyond using our physical bodies as battering rams. So impact on the micro level is still true, but in our activities, it's crude. Now, our physical bodies are tremendously complex and sophisticated. And they're designed to produce conscious soul. It's ironic and it's shameful and psychologically painful and embarrassing that we are actually generating conscious soul without being conscious of it. Walking into a lamp pole produces consciousness and conscious soul, but that isn't the only way we do things. In those simple, discrete actions like that, our time on earth is too valuable to spend it in very primitive, simple moments of awakening consciousness, and doing so deliberately in crude ways. Now, because of the fall of humanity, and because of our minimal waking state, we're rather inefficient in our deliberate awakening of consciousness. Performing spiritual exercises of the right type can help, and it can improve our efficiency, but still, a lot of what we do is a lot of this soul material, the conscious soul material that we develop, is developed subconsciously, embarrassing as that can be. Now, it sounds counterintuitive, but it is true. The divine hierarchies we've talked about them a lot. They've helped us to develop this now really sensitive and sophisticated and complicated dense physical body. And we've done that without full waking consciousness. But we have to keep in mind that our bodies are the agencies of transforming unknowns into knowns. Now, we said that we are doing that through the material kingdom. So, every time we take food into our bodies and process it, we are alchemizing it. Whether we are wakingly conscious of it or not, we are producing conscious soul. We become more conscious even if we're just merely metabolizing. That is to say, somebody can be in a coma and still be performing the service to the cosmos of producing conscious soul. Now, this brings out another matter or another point about conscious soul. This is another little side trip or epicycle. Digestion, absorption, assimilation, and wasting are not merely chemical activities. In some ways, our bodies are like war zones. There are actions and reactions and all sorts of things happening with form. When it comes to our food, we have to overpower the consciousness with which our food is imbued. Now, at this point, minerals are not food for us. They're too far away from us in evolution. We get ions from them and ionic reactions, but we can't take a hunk of carbon and chew it up and make hydrocarbons out of it. We can't do that. So we get our food from the vegetables and animal kingdoms. And the vegetables especially do what we can't do. The entire animal kingdom can't take minerals either and turn them into foods. So everything is dependent on the vegetables. That's their service. However, if we eat vegetables or animal food, the animals and the vegetables have already worked on the minerals. And it is such a thing that action of any type is irreversible. We can't undo the fact that the minerals have been changed by being part of a plant and changed further and more sophisticatedly by that plant becoming part of an animal. So, if we take food into our body, that food has a nature of its own from the plant or animal or both that it has been in that has to be overcome to make it our own. This is called the law of assimilation, and it's a matter of overpowering it. A lot of scientists go so far as to say that we're allergic to all foods, and unless we overcome that allergy, we would starve to death. That's their way of saying the same thing. They don't talk about plant kingdoms doing this and that. So, the more highly evolved an organism is, the harder it is to overpower it. And you can't undo what has been done before, so the plant is going to assert itself, and eventually even plant food is going to pass out of your body. It's part of the wasting mechanism. And obviously by this, the worst kind of food that you could take in with having to overpower it and keep it in your body would be to be a cannibal, because that's the stuff that would come from a human body has been worked on by the consciousness of the human who is in that body. So what we're saying is that you have to overpower food, and you have to keep it overpowered if you want to have a stable body. Now, so I happen to be an ethical vegetarian. I believe that animals feel pain, and it's unnecessary to eat animals and to cause them pain. And I believe that the animals are higher in evolution, and every moment of their life is more valuable to the general whole than every moment of a plant. And beside that, that is the service of the plant, is to provide food for the higher kingdoms. So I'm an ethical vegetarian, but I take into account this law of assimilation about food having to be overpowered. And for that reason, the mainstay of my protein in my diet is I eat microorganisms. I eat spirulina, which is a kind of blue-green algae, and that's as low as you can get on the evolutionary chain, easy to overpower and easy to be part of you. It's a wonderful form of getting protein. Ounce for ounce, it is 3 to 5 times the protein that you get in meat, depending on the kind of meat. Of course, there's much more to the diet than all of this, and someday we'll go into that sort of thing. But this is just one factor, and it's a factor that indicates how we are building soul material by the application of will in overpowering the foodstuff. This brings us back to our topic. We see that if we look, for example, at the Trinity of the Spirit, we say the divine spirit, the life spirit, and the human spirit, each of them has a characteristic. The human spirit is activity. The life spirit is love, wisdom. And the divine spirit is will. So now we're going to talk about will for a little bit. This is taking way longer than I thought it would. But I'm having a good time. I hope you are too, because this is... all right. We conclude then that development of will is important. In fact, will and self-consciousness go hand in hand, that they work together. Now, some people, we're talking, I want to talk, I'm going to go with a little unscripted aside. There are trinities of attributes that are important in life. And one of them is the attribute of will, knowledge, and sensitivity. In order to progress forward spiritually, you have to be in balance. You can't go forward on a bicycle if you're off balance. And the same thing is true with spiritual development. And you have to have a balance between will, knowledge, and sensitivity. And this is where self-analysis comes in. we should know ourselves, and we should come to understand in ourselves if we are weak in will, or if we are weak in knowledge, or if we are weak in sensitivity. My experience is that most people in our society are very strong in knowledge and somewhat strong in sensitivity, but weak in will. And their progress would be much better if they had more will. So what we're going to talk about for the rest of the evening, which will not be too long anymore, are the development of will. Now, we're saying that conscious soul is developed by experiences that bring us to consciousness. And we're also saying that conscious soul is developed by acts of will. Now, some people try to combine the two. They try to do acts that are acts of will and that they are acts of waking. At this time of the year, for example, there's the Polar Bear Club. The Polar Bear Club on January 1st, they saw a hole in the ice, and they go in either naked or with a swimsuit, and they swim in the ice water. That is an act of will, and that is also an act of waking consciousness. The same thing happens with, like endurance races or things like that. There's an endurance race that goes from the bottom of Death Valley, which is the lowest place in the continental United States, to the top of Mount Whitney, which is the highest place in the continental United States. That's not counting Alaska. So they start in Death Valley and they run all the way up the mountain. That's a real endurance race. But that is an awakening experience, and it is an act of will. Now, some people would say these things are not spiritual, but spiritual is not necessarily reading some inspirational poetry or something like that. Spirituality is becoming more conscious. And if we are in need of developing will and having basic simple consciousness, that certainly is a spiritual activity. Now, some of these things are extreme, but I can see that they're effective and that for some people they're important. Some people need to prove themselves that they can do that as an act of will. Now, let's talk about exercises for will development. But before doing that, we have to make one clarification. And that clarification is differentiating will from desire. Will is the most subtle power that we have. If an activity has teeth grinding or muscle tensioning, it's desire. It is what the Bible calls the will of the flesh. The expression of the will is quiet. And ultimately, it is invisible. There's no exertion, and there's no need for drama. There's no need for fanfare or anything like that. These things, you just express the will. Now, one of the best descriptions I have seen of the application of will came from a novel. It came from the novel Demian by Hermann Hesse. And it is a novel about two young lads, one of whom is called Demian, who has quite remarkable abilities. And the other one is his follower and would be advancing himself. And at one place in the novel, they're in school. And they want to be out doing something else. And I believe it's Demian that says, I'm going to fix it. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, the teacher dismisses the class and they're free to go. And the friend asks Demian, how did you do it? And Demian says, something like this. It's a very simple sentence. I saw him do it. I saw him do it. Now this, whether Hermann Hesse knew this or not, this is based on very deep spiritual truth. The divine spirit works through the life spirit. The divine spirit is will, and the life spirit is pure imagination. Not imaginings, but the ability for imagination of any kind of imaginings. So the will expresses itself through imagination. And this is exactly what Demian, if that was the one who did it, in the novel did. He imagined the teacher canceling the class, and the class was canceled or it was dismissed. Now the ethics of that are not very nice. You have to be very careful about the exercise of will. This is why sensitivity is important. If you're sensitive to the rights of others, you just don't force your will on them. So the ethics of that may not have been good, but it was an excellent example. So the methodology was excellent. What do we gather from this? One of the best ways to develop will, if you want to develop will and you feel that you are weak in will, one of the best ways is to form images and to hold those images as long as you can, even if it's only a fraction of a second, and even if your images are nothing but blurs or wishes that you had formed an image. But you got to start somewhere. And so one of the best ways for developing will is through using the imagination. Let's look at one other exercise for developing will that is wonderful. And the exercise is to do a simple, purposeless activity every day at the same time. To do a simple, purposeless activity every day at the same time. Now we got to clarify. The activity is best if it's something arbitrary. The divine spirit is arbitrary. If you say, well, this is important to me making money, it's no longer arbitrary. You have personalized it, and this is not an act of pure will. What often is the case is somebody looks at a glass of water for 3 minutes every day at the same time. You don't think about the water, you don't think about the glass, you don't think about what you're doing, you just look at a glass of water 3 minutes every day. And the time that you choose can't be real convenient, like when you're brushing your teeth, but you do it at some time that is not convenient to you, but it's not really inconvenient either. It's an arbitrary time. And if you do that every day for a year, you will be astounded by the amount of will that you have developed. You can be sure that if you try doing that, enormous resistance is going to come up. You're going to say to yourself, I'm stupid for doing this. And that's where the reason or the knowledge part comes in and tries to take over where the will is trying to be asserted. So and so all kinds of resistance will become. Now, we have talked a little bit about spiritual exercises. Eventually, we are going to have a series of talks about spiritual exercises. But when we talk about this exercise, anytime you try to do any spiritual exercise, you have to be advised that this is something that is necessary for your spiritual constitution. Do you need will? Or would you be better off developing sensitivity or developing knowledge? It's important that you have a modicum of self-knowledge and self-understanding before you go flying off on exercises which can be quite powerful. Now that's as far as we're going to go this evening. If we were to go into the next step, which is intellectual soul, we would be here for another hour. I hope this is helpful to you, and I hope it's enjoyable to you. It is wonderful for me. I certainly enjoy every bit of it. So thank you very much, and have a good night.